As the war between Israel and Hamas continues in Gaza, a new threat has emerged. Iran's defense minister says, quote, the United States will be hit hard if Washington does not push for a ceasefire. Now, thousands of lives have been lost in retaliation since the terrorist attack by Hamas in southern Israel on October 7th, which left more than 1,400 people dead. Now, to chat about this recent threat in more detail is our foreign affairs expert and the host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, joins us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says there will be no talk of a ceasefire unless Hamas releases the more than 200 hostages. So let me ask you, how much influence does the United States have on Israel right now?
They do. They've always had influence, and they always will, particularly when our Secretary of State is in Israel making his rounds, meeting with Palestinian leaders, meeting with, obviously, Bibi Netanyahu. They have look, Israel doesn't have too many friends in the region, as we know, so they obviously look to the United States for support, regardless of which president is in office. There is usually a consistent relationship. I don't think Biden's relationship with Bibi Netanyahu has been particularly great, or with Israel. He hasn't given them the kind of support we saw, for example, under President Trump or President Bush. But you know, the United States is quite influential. The only thing that we're seeing from the United States right now that might be problematic is that both sides feel like they could get more from the president of the United States. So you have the Palestinians and unfortunately the Hamas supporters as well, and unfortunately they're bundled together, are pushing for a ceasefire before they're calling for the hostages to be released. Of course, most sane people think it's quite fair for any leader to say, we're not going to stop until we get our civilians back. There are babies being held by terrorists. And it's mind-boggling that people keep saying humanitarian ceasefire. I just got another email from the United Nations. We must push for a humanitarian ceasefire. We must push for a humanitarian cause, which is getting those innocent civilians back who are being held hostage by terrorists. So that's where we have it right now. Of course, the United States has a ton of influence, the Europeans, the United Nations, everyone, but everyone must be doing what is right. I don't care if you support Palestinians or Israelis, or you don't even need to have a side in this. You have to understand that the hostages have to be released.
So what's the latest, Lisa? Have more hostages been released, including some of those babies?
Unfortunately not. I know that the mission inside Gaza, although it's focused on the Hamas headquarters, the weapons depots, etc., the priority is actually to get those hostages out, to locate them, to to be able to get them out in a safe way, of course, without any harm. One female soldier was rescued by IDF forces over the last week. And as you know, 4 have been released by Hamas themselves, but we are still looking at over 200 hostages who are being held and have not to this moment been rescued or released yet.
Lisa, some military experts believe that Iran is using resistance groups in Iraq to exploit the Biden administration's fear of escalation to gain power in the Middle East. There are reports that bases housing U.S. and coalition troops have been attacked at least 28 times since October the 17th.
Yeah, and you don't hear about it because the Biden administration does not want this to escalate. They do not want to get involved. And they have on occasion said that this is very different and separate from the war between Israel and Hamas. It is not. This is actually, on a grander scale, Iran's regime's war against the West, which is the big Satan, the United States, and the little Satan, which is Israel. They could not be more clear about it. And they continue to make threats against the United States, right? For example, when you just said Iran's regime says, we will retaliate against the United States if there is no ceasefire. So obviously they see Israel and the United States as one.
Right.
You know, we wouldn't see it that way because I know the Biden administration, again, is trying to play both sides and trying to be as fair as possible, what they believe is fair as possible, without seeming to be overly in support of Israel or get involved with the proxies. Iran will continue to use its proxies. It does not want war on its own soil. So it is using proxies in Lebanon, which is Hezbollah. It's using proxies in Gaza, which is Hamas, proxies in Yemen, which is the Houthis, and of course, insurgencies in Syria and in Iraq. So they have the region covered. And this is exactly what we've been warning against for the last decade, where we see Iran's regime sending out weapons to these parts and using their proxies, not only locally, but also waiting for the day to attack U.S. assets, as they are doing right now, trying to drag the United States into this war. But of course, the United States is trying to resist as best as possible.
In a bipartisan vote last Friday, the GOP-led House passed legislation that would impose new sanctions on ports and refineries that ship or process oil from the Iranian regime. Now, how much could this really help the situation right now in the Middle East?
Yeah, it's a little too late, as they say. But I want to just draw out a few different points here and connect them. A lot of people talk about the United States actually having a hand in helping Iran's regime, emboldening them, giving them the funds to carry out these kinds of attacks. Why do we say that? We know that Iran's regime is supporting Hamas, supporting Hezbollah, supporting the Houthis, etc., with the help of Qatar and other bodies, but mainly Qatar and the United States' loosening of sanctions. For example, Iran has been able to sell oil to people like China and make billions on their own. So in the last year and a half or so, they have had 60 to 90 billion in oil sales and revenue. Wow. They have had obviously sanctions removed where they can do, many other things and trade at least regionally the way that they'd like to. We have seen them carry out many human rights abuses without any consequence. We have seen them get $6 billion on top of a very lopsided prisoner exchange just recently. And a lot of people say, well, that $6 billion didn't really get cashed yet. The check is still sitting there. Well, perhaps, but they have gotten billions more in very different places. And don't forget, under the Obama administration, they got 90 billion on top of the nuclear deal, which got a few prisoners out as well. Taking hostage, does that sound familiar? Yes. Iran regime did it to the United States right after they came into power, 1979, 1980, and they have taught their proxies to do it also. That's what we're watching Hamas do at this moment. Connect the dots, people. Iran's regime is involved. The United States has to stop, and the West in general has to stop empowering, emboldening Iran's regime, because they are the head of the dragon and very much responsible for all of this.
And now there are reports that the leader of the Hamas terrorist group had a recent meeting with Iran's supreme leader, Lisa.
Right. I mean, do we need any more evidence that Iran's regime is involved? In the first weeks that this happened, we saw Antony Blinken, the State Department spokesperson. We saw even President Biden himself saying, we don't really have any indication that Iran's regime is involved. We will continue to monitor this. They are saying themselves, we're involved. We're meeting with Hamas. There was a Wall Street Journal expose that actually outlined Iran's involvement in all of this, the meetings that led up to this Hamas massacre on October 7th, the money that went into carrying out this attack, the training even was provided by Iran's regime. So we know their fingerprints are all over this.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, Lisa. Now, a recent report by the Associated Press says it was to coordinate more of an effort to help civilians in the Gaza Strip and to determine a post-war scenario for Gaza.
I know, it's mind-boggling, because for people who don't know much about this region, they say, oh, but there's Mahmoud Abbas, there's the Palestinian Authorities, the PA. As you know, the PA is an offshoot, or I should say the child of the PLO. Yasser Arafat was the leader of that organization. They have never been proper leaders for the Palestinian people. They have never advocated for peaceful solutions that would give the Palestinian people the stability and the safety that they want. Instead, they have taken every dollar and put it into terrorism. Any money that they get for their schools, they're indoctrinating their children. They've never been proper leaders for the Palestinian people. And now Antony Blinken and the West probably feels as though, well, the PA is a better alternative to Hamas, which probably, but we're talking about degrees of difference here. But the PA themselves have a long history of advocating for terrorism, not wanting a two-state solution, not agreeing to many measures that would help coexistence and that would help stability of the region. So yes, he's meeting with them. I think he thinks that perhaps will be something better to bring him to Gaza to control. They were in Gaza, by the way, when Israel handed over Gaza in 2005, it was the PA, and then there were elections. Hamas kicked the PA out, and they won the elections in 2007. So they're no strangers to that region, obviously to those people, to Gaza themselves and the West Bank. But we don't have any hope that would be a better future for the Palestinian people.
Lisa, let's circle back to the hostages for just a moment here. The U.S. military is flying spy drones over Gaza to search for the more than 200 hostages who were kidnapped by Hamas last month.
Yeah, so the United States is obviously helping with many resources. Just this morning, news broke that the United States is actually sending a submarine to the region as well. It's unfortunate that this is escalating, right? And the drones, of course, being more of a humanitarian effort to bring about a quicker ceasefire, because the United States and the West believes that if they find the hostages, they can then press Bibi Netanyahu and the IDF to be like, well, now you got your hostages back, now you have to stop. And of course, we would all want to see an end to this bloodshed, and we would all want to see the hostages come home safely. So this is, obviously lending a hand to help them perhaps find it in a safe way. Drones are, of course, unmanned, and perhaps we can find a solution to this much quicker.
Now, Lisa, you and I have talked extensively in the past about the importance of vetting refugees properly before allowing them into our countries here. Well, the FBI confirmed that a 20-year-old Jordanian citizen was arrested in Houston for illegal possession of a firearm that he was allegedly planning an attack on Jews?
Yes, this is, thank God he was caught, right? So this is basically a foiled attack, because this is a Jordanian guy. His visa expired. He was on a travel visa here, expired in 2019. He did not come under, basically officials didn't catch him, I guess, but they did basically find out that he is getting training, that he is acquiring weapons, and that his target is to target, Jewish organizations, synagogues, schools, etc. And thank goodness he was caught in time. We had another woman in Indiana who is being called a terrorist because she, of course, she plowed into a building believing that it was a Jewish school. I think she was wrong, but she wanted to kill Jewish children. That's the bottom line. And we have to ask ourselves, is this the new normal? I mean, look, this war will hopefully end sooner rather than later. Hopefully those hostages will come home. There will be a ceasefire. There was, just like there was on October 6th. We will go back to a region that is at its boiling point, but is not boiling over. But we will also have to live our lives knowing that these people live among us, that people who are willing to drive into a school, to use their cars as weapons to kill Jewish children on American soil. I know you have a similar situation in Canada, where you're seeing a lot of anti-Semitic attacks. It's all over the world. We're seeing it in Europe and all over. This has to stop. We have to implore our lawmakers. This is a bipartisan issue. No group should be, tolerating any sort of hatred like this, particularly violence against civilians and children. It's a bigger issue, I think, and I think this is what we have to deal. This is the day after, and this is what we have to deal with going forward: is to really rid the world of this horrific cancer.
And we're seeing a lot of anti-Semitism on the rise in both university and college campuses. What's being done right now to really combat the hatred of Jews?
Hal, for the first month, we're a month into this conflict, we saw a lot of universities basically backing away from the issue and saying it's free speech, because they thought it would just go away. It's not something they wanted to deal with. And of course, we have to remember, anti-Semitism is rampant, especially at elite universities. The left loves anti-Semitism. It's really impossible to say it's on both sides right now. We're not seeing so much. In the past we have. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, from the far right, but the left is the beacon of anti-Semitism right now, and they have to call it out, or it's going to become a much bigger issue. We have seen a few arrests. I saw another arrest this morning in Massachusetts for a guy who punched a Jewish kid in the face at a university, spitting on Jewish students hiding in the cafeteria or library in Cooper Union in New York. We saw kids hiding in the library, and the librarian offers them to hide in the attic. I mean, we're talking about, we've never seen something like this. This is what we read about in the Holocaust. And to have it happen here in the West, especially at universities, which are the places where people are supposed to become enlightened and learn and become, tolerant. And really, it's a very, very scary time, not just for Jews, but for anybody who is watching this and has a sane mind, to see any group targeted like this, and to see others just standing by and not doing anything about it. So I think that things have gotten so out of hand that the universities are really stepping up efforts to curb this. We're hoping that that's the case, but we do hope that this will be something that comes to an end very, very soon, and does not outlast this war.
Yeah, absolutely. She's our foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari. Thanks again for joining us today from Los Angeles.
Of course. Thank you. My pleasure.